Everyone must have some form of communication to meaningfully interact with others. That doesn't mean that communication looks the same for everyone, though. Some people communicate through eye gaze, facial expressions, body language, gestures, writing, signs, pictures, technology, vocally, and challenging behaviors. Behavior is also said to be another form of communication. Behavior often communicates a person's wants, needs, likes, dislikes, and more. If a person does not have a way to communicate effectively, they may exhibit problem behaviors. For example, consider a baby who has an ear infection. The baby will cry until they're no longer in pain. The parent must figure out why the baby is crying so they can help the child. The baby crying then receives attention from her caregivers to provide comfort and medication so she can feel better and stop crying. In this example, the baby's cry communicates with the parents to alert them that she needs them. Let's also consider a young boy who wants his mom to read him a story before going to sleep. He's only 2 and doesn't have the language required to request a story. So instead, he cries and pulls on his mother's clothing, pointing to the books. The boy's crying behavior communicates to his mom that he wants her to read the story. Suppose his mother reads him the story after that behavior. In that case, he's reinforced for communicating that way and will continue to communicate until he learns differently. Just as all communication sends a message, so does behavior. When a person behaves and/or communicates, they're trying to meet a need. This is referred to as having a function behind the behavior. In other words, there's a purpose or reason for the person behaving that way, and it's always to gain or avoid something. Unfortunately, sometimes the behaviors people exhibit are not always good behaviors. They may be what is referred to as problematic, maladaptive, or challenging. This means that the behavior might not be socially acceptable, like screaming in public, helpful to the person, such as hitting tantrum behavior, or safe for other people, like hitting or kicking others. When a behavior is problematic, as described in those examples, it's essential to find the function of behavior so that we can then identify a better and more appropriate behavior to teach the child that will get the child access to the same thing. One way to learn more about the function is to identify what happened immediately before the problem behavior, known as a fast trigger or antecedent. It's essential to understand what antecedents are for a couple of reasons. We can be aware of antecedents to understand what's upsetting to our children. This will help us to reduce the antecedent or troubling situation in the future. Suppose the antecedent situation is not able to be removed. In that case, parents can know when the problematic situation will occur or recognize when it's happening. This allows parents to help their child deal with the situation using coping strategies. For example, if a parent knows that going into a loud grocery store is an antecedent for the child to scream or run away, the parent can put noise-canceling headphones on the child before entering the store. This may help the child to feel calm and reduce screaming or running away. It's also just as important to keep track of what happened directly after the behavior. This is referred to as the consequence of the behavior. So when we look closely at a problem behavior to determine the function, we look at the antecedent, the behavior, and the consequence. We call this the ABCs of behavior. Here are a few examples. It's bedtime, and Mom puts Sally into her crib, says good night, shuts off the light, and goes into the next room. Every night Sally cries when Mom turns off the light and walks away. Mom then comes back into the room, picks up Sally, and sings her a song until she falls asleep. The antecedents are Mom putting Sally into the crib and saying goodnight, shutting off the light, and walking away. The behavior is Sally crying, and the consequence is Mom walking back into the room, picking up Sally, and singing her a song. It's dinner time, and Mom puts Sally's food on her plate and puts it in front of Sally. When Sally sees the green leafy vegetables, she throws the food off of her plate and onto the floor. Sally's dog then eats the vegetables, and Sally does not. The antecedent is dinner and Mom putting food on the table in front of Sally. The behavior is Sally throwing her food from her plate and onto the floor. And the consequence is the dog devours the vegetables, and Sally doesn't need to eat the vegetables. Sally's mom is driving her to school. When she pulls into the parent drop-off, Sally sees her teacher. Sally's teacher waves to Sally. Sally gets out of the car and runs to her teacher, and her teacher gives her a big hug. The antecedent is Sally seeing her teacher wave to her. The behavior is exiting the car and running to the teacher. The consequence is getting a hug from her teacher. It's time to go grocery shopping. When Mom and Sally enter the store, the bright lights shine and people talk loudly. There are many people in the store, and Sally begins to scream. Mom quickly picks Sally up and removes her from the store. The antecedent is entering the busy store, the lights, and the volume of the people. The behavior is Sally screaming. The consequence is Mom removing Sally from the store. The antecedent behavior consequence sheet attached to this lesson is an example of what practitioners use to extract information from situations. They write down what happened directly before the behavior, the antecedent, what the behavior was, obviously the behavior, and what happened directly after the behavior, the consequence. Looking at behavioral situations may be hard if we do not use a structure or format to consider what's going on. People can write their information into this sheet to help them really see what's going on. Now that we understand the ABCs of behavior, let's take a closer look at what we mean by identifying the functions of behavior. When we think about the functions of behavior, we think of why people do what they do. Suppose a person does something and enjoys what happens afterwards. In this case, they'll repeat the behavior in the future. This is called reinforcement. Conversely, suppose the person does a behavior and dislikes the consequence that happens afterwards. In that case, they're less likely to do that behavior in the future. People either like or dislike the consequence of their behaviors, which affects how they behave in the future. They do not do the behavior again if the consequence is perceived as unfavorable. But if the consequence is favorable, they'll do the behavior again. Once we understand the importance of antecedents and consequences, we can begin to uncover the functions of behavior to help the person learn better behaviors to meet the same function. Researchers describe 4 functions of behavior. These are attention, escape, access to an item or activity, and automatic reinforcement, often referred to as a sensory function. Access to attention is when somebody wants social interactions. For example, it's essential to know that attention requires another person. Meanwhile, automatic reinforcement only requires the person who's behaving. A child at a large family birthday party may scream loudly. Suppose people give the child attention by saying something or just looking at her. In that case, the child's screaming will likely increase if she wants attention. Escape from a person, activity, or demand is when a person does not want something and tries to get away from it. For example, if a child is eating dinner and sneaks unwanted food to the dog under the table, the child can escape having to eat disliked food, and the behavior of the dog feeding will continue in the future. Access to an activity or tangible item is when a person wants a specific thing or action. For example, a child who has a temper tantrum because she wants a toy. If the toy is provided, the tantrums are encouraged and will continue. If the child does not get the toy, they are less likely to temper for the toy later. Another example is a child who cries in the grocery store when she is not given her favorite candy. If the child gets the sweet, the crying behavior will continue. If the child does not get the candy, they're less likely to cry again. Automatic reinforcement, also referred to as self-stimulation or pain reduction, includes any 5 senses: touch, smell, sight, sound, or taste. A person may perform these behaviors if they're by themselves because it pleases them. Consider singing in the shower. Many people enjoy their voices in the shower and continue to sing even if nobody else is around. Automatic reinforcement may also be used for pain reduction. For example, think about getting a mosquito bite and scratching it. Scratching makes you feel better, therefore you're more likely to scratch and itch. Other examples of automatic reinforcement are rocking side to side, humming, sucking their thumb or finger, twirling hair, fidgeting, tapping fingers, and other similar behaviors. Now that we know the basics of understanding the 4 functions of behavior, let's take a closer look at a few examples. Here's an example of attention behavior. Baby Susie screams whenever her mom takes her to her crib and walks away. Whenever baby Susie screams, her mom gives Susie her favorite teddy bear. She soothes her daughter by singing nursery rhymes to stop the screaming. Susie always stops screaming when her mom does this. Is Susie crying to get access to her mom, teddy bear, or to her mom and the bear? The next day, baby Susie plays with her teddy bear and her mom. When her mom turns on Susie's favorite music, she walks away from Susie to get the laundry. Baby Susie immediately starts screaming until her mom comes back to pick her up. Based on these 2 events, it seems as if baby Susie's crying and screaming behavior is to get access to her mom's attention. Therefore, Susie's screaming and crying function are to access her mom's attention. Now let's hear the example of Paul and escape. Paul dislikes the taste of medication. When Paul's dad attempts to give him medicine, Paul pushes his dad's hand away and screams. The medicine usually spills on the floor, and Paul doesn't have to take the medicine. In this example, Paul is likely to scream and swat the medication away in the future because he was able to escape its horrible taste. Meanwhile, Maria loves chocolate-covered gummy bears. Every time Maria's mom and Maria walk next to the gummy bears, Maria begins a tantrum by throwing herself on the floor and pleading with her mom to buy them. If Maria's mom gives Maria the gummy bears, Maria stops her tantrum. In the future, Maria will likely have tantrums while in the candy aisle until she gets her bears. Jose has autism. He loves to wave his hands in front of his face and watch his fingers move. Jose does this behavior when he's all by himself in multiple locations. Jose enjoys watching his fingers move, and he'll continue to do this in the future. Jose does not require another person to enjoy watching his fingers move. This is one way to determine whether the functions of Jose's behavior is automatic or sensory-based. Another similar example is Julia, who loves to sing. One day she sings while she's taking a shower. Her voice sounds better than ever in the shower, so Julia continues to sing in the shower. Again, this behavior didn't require another person. Julia enjoyed hearing herself and consequently increased her behavior. Understanding the function of behavior helps to prevent challenging behaviors. Caregivers can teach their children to meet their needs in more appropriate ways. By watching what happens before and directly after a behavior, we can hypothesize the function of the behavior. First, it's crucial to consider what may have led to the behavior and what the child gained through it. Using this information allows us to form our best guess about the function of behavior. Once we know why the child is performing the behavior, we can teach them a different behavior instead. This other behavior replaces the problem behaviors and still meets their needs rather than using maladaptive behaviors. For example, the child who politely asks for a cookie may be given a cookie, and the child who sneaks a cookie can be taught to ask. A child who wants attention can be taught to say "excuse me" and wait before interrupting. A child can request a break to escape challenging situations instead of having a tantrum. Let's look at a few more examples of the 4 functions of behavior. Notice the antecedent and consequences for each behavior and how this helps to determine the function of behavior. First, we have the child who was put down for a nap and cried until mom returned. The antecedent was being put down for rest and left alone in the room. Mom returning was the consequence. We hypothesized that the child wanted the mom's attention. The following example shows little Susie, who was playing with blocks. She used excellent communication to ask for another block. The antecedent was playing with the blocks and not having the block she wanted or needed in front of her. The behavior was asking for the block. The consequence was receiving the block. As we know, not all of our children can communicate like this. If Susie can't use words to ask, she may cry, hit, tantrum, or have other behaviors when all she wanted was a block. This is why it's so important to find out what our children are trying to communicate and teach them functional communication.